All right, so the Canon 6D, once hailed as one of the best cameras of its time, it's definitely made its mark. But here we are in 2024, and the camera's definitely come and gone. But the question is, does it still have a place in the market today? How does it compare to other options that are already out there? And is it even worth picking up a used one at this point? Today we're gonna dive into all that. But first I'm gonna describe who I think is probably the ideal target audience for who this camera might be a good fit for. So if this person sounds like you, then the Canon 6D might be a good fit for you. But if not, still stick with me to the end because I'm gonna mention other alternatives that are around the Canon 6D's price range and that offer similar experience and performance to the Canon 6D when it first came out. All right, so who is this camera for? Well, to put it simply, it's perfect for beginners who want to step into the world of full frame photography, but just don't want to spend a whole arm and leg to do so. It's compatible with Canon's EF series lens, which because of mirrorless cameras pretty much taking over the market of cameras today, the Canon EF series lens has definitely really come down in price and has become a lot more affordable and accessible for people. For example, you can pick up a EF 24-70 f2.8, and we all know compared to its RF counterpart is like a fraction of its price. So that lens and camera combo that I just mentioned right there, for what you could get it at is honestly a steal. However, if you plan on shooting more fast-paced genres of photography like sports, wildlife, events, this camera might not be for you. And that really comes down to the autofocus because it only has 11 autofocus points and it can be a little slow and sluggish at times. But if you're shooting things such as landscapes, portraits, anything to where you can kind of take a little bit more of your time and speed's not a huge priority, then this camera can still perform very well in those type of areas. Now, if video is something you want to explore on the other hand, the Canon 6D probably isn't for you. It's really only focused on stills photography. Also, keep in mind that you'll probably need to buy the camera secondhand. I mean, not probably, definitely you'll need to buy it secondhand because the camera came out in 2012, over 12 years ago, and it's no longer in production. At the time of recording this video, this camera goes for about $300 used. So if you're okay with that, this camera could be a great entry point into full frame photography. All right, so if what I've described fits what you need, I'm about to go over the actual specs of the Canon 6D, what I personally don't like about the camera, and some other budget-friendly options in case you decide to look in a different direction. I personally had this camera for years, and I've definitely gotten my good use out of it. So with that being said, let's dive into today's video. All right, so first off, the Canon 6D sports a 20 megapixel sensors. Now, you might be thinking, 20 megapixels doesn't sound like all that. But to put things in perspective, the Sony ZV-E1, which is the camera that's shooting this video right now, only sports a 12 megapixel sensor. And the Canon R6, which is a newer mirrorless camera that Canon released a few years ago, sports that same 20 megapixel sensor. So as you can see, camera manufacturers are still putting out cameras with the same or even less megapixel counts than this camera, which came out over a decade ago. Now, there's a reasoning behind that, because having a lower megapixel count actually comes with its perks, especially in low light performance. So don't take the megapixel count all by itself just at face value. Now, here's where the Canon 6D can actually be more limited in terms of what it's capable of. Like I mentioned earlier, it only has 11 autofocus points and they're all around the center. And they are a bit sluggish and slow at times. If you've ever had any experience using a modern mirrorless camera where there's pretty much autofocus points filled across the entire screen, you'll definitely feel the step back that you'll take from using a camera like this. It also only has one SD card slot, so if you're shooting anything more critical or important like a wedding and you want to back up your photos or whatnot, unfortunately this camera can't do that. And then there's video capabilities. This camera can only shoot up to 1080p, 30 frames per second, And to keep it blunt, it really just doesn't stack up to the 4K standard that we're all used to now. Sure, it might be better than the iPhone 4 or whatever phones were out during that time. It was a step up compared to that. But that doesn't really mean much, because even if you want to use it, say, for something more casual, just capturing moments with your buddies or your family, you're better off just using whatever phone you have on you at that point. So, with that being said, what's the Canon 6D good for in 2024? So like I mentioned earlier, low light performance, particularly low light photography. It used to be one of the best cameras for astrophotography, and it still is. If you pair it with something like the 16-35 f2.8, you can get honestly really stunning results in that area. The full frame sensor gives you really good depth and really good background blur, something you'll definitely appreciate, say, if you're upgrading from something like the Canon Rebel series. And let's not forget about the Canon colors, since I definitely want to highlight that. Even though at this point I've switched to Sony in my career, there's just something about Canon colors, about the richness, the vibrance, and how they really put everything together that I really just can't put it into words. I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but it's honestly worth repeating because, like I mentioned, RF lenses are kind of taking over the Canon space right now. EF lenses really do come at a more affordable and accessible range for beginner videographers and photographers in 2024. So it's crazy to think that these lenses used to be lenses that all the professionals would use. So to see them now at this point, I just want to highlight some of the standout options that you can get. So the first lens is the Canon 16-35 f2.8 L lens. There's a Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3 version. If you're looking for the best bang for your buck cost to performance ratio, I'd probably go for the Mark 2. There's also the 24-70 f2.8 or the 24-105 f4. Both of these lenses are really good options for just a standard zoom lens, a versatile lens that can cover you in a majority of situations. And finally, there's a 70-200 f2.8 L lens, which is crazy. It's used to be and still is a very premium lens. It's crazy to think that you can find it for roughly about $1,000 or so now. And for that price range, for the type of results and performance you're getting out of it, it's a great deal. Lastly, I would even recommend picking up the Nifty 50, the 50mm f1.8, just because it gives you access really early on and for a really low price to that beautiful bokeh background blur and low light performance. Last but not least, the Canon 6D is built like a freaking tank. I have fond memories, well maybe not so fond, of me literally having this camera in my hand and dropping it from waist level or above straight onto the ground. It nicked up the camera unfortunately, but I literally picked it back up and just continued shooting with it. This thing is just built like a tank, and no matter what you throw at it, it just keeps chugging. All right, so let's talk about what this camera doesn't do well then. First things first, if you're thinking about using this camera for video work, I'm just gonna keep it completely blunt with you and not sugarcoat anything. Do not even waste your time. Completely look the other way. The Canon 6D's video capabilities are completely outdated, and it's not worth the hassle of trying to make it work somehow with this body. So we'll bring it back to the autofocus. If you're coming from, like I mentioned earlier, anything newer, a mirrorless camera, or anything newer at this point, anything with a more sophisticated autofocus, the Canon 6D's autofocus system will feel slow and sluggish. It's crazy to think how far tech has come, but that is considered one of its down points. Another point to consider is the fixed screen on the back. This could be considered a pro or a con actually. So the pro is, since the screen is built into the camera, the whole entire camera body is just one piece, which really helps its durability. I overall think that traditional DSLR style bodies are more durable than modern mirrorless bodies. But on the other hand, because it's a fixed screen, especially if you're shooting outdoors, anything pretty much outside of eye level, you might potentially see glare on your screen when you're trying to shoot, which will really affect what you're able to see from the screen and of course, potentially affect the composition you're able to get out of it. That's something to consider as well. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up all of the limitations of the Canon 6D. So keep those in mind if you're considering on picking up this camera. So to wrap it all up, is the Canon 6D right for you? If you're primarily a beginner photographer and you really haven't stepped into the world of professional work yet, you're just into casual shooting, maybe shooting something like sunrises, sunsets, or landscapes on your weekends or whenever you have time, then this camera could be a good fit. It really does those things really well. That's what I primarily used this camera for when I first started out. However, if you're looking to do any type of more serious work, particularly any type of video work at all, such as covering events, shooting sports, wildlife, this camera might not meet your needs. In that case, you might want to consider something a little more advanced. So talking about more advanced options, if you want to step into the world of mirrorless cameras and want to stick with Canon, I'd recommend the Canon R6, Mark II, or Mark I, either one. Those two are fantastic cameras that offer much better performance, but unfortunately they do come at a higher price. And if you also have to remember that these cameras also sport the RF mount, so you're gonna also have to purchase RF lenses with that, which comes with a bigger price tag as well. But if you're willing to invest more, the Canon R6 is a really good option. If, however, you like to stick with the traditional DSLR style body because you like the durability or you like that tactile feeling, maybe since you're coming from something like a Rebel or you have other experiences using traditional DSLR style cameras, then I look at the Canon 5D Mark III and the 5D Mark IV. Those cameras are pretty much upgraded versions of the Canon 6D, so they do everything better in terms of faster autofocus, they have 2 SD card slots, and they have much better video capabilities. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up my overall thoughts on the Canon 6D in 2024. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and check out the other videos on this channel, as I mainly talk about photography and videography related content. So let me know your thoughts on the Canon 6D in 2024. And with that being said, I appreciate all of you for making it to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and take it easy.